Monsters, Inc. is a film about an energy crisis. It looks at the various means to which corporations achieve their goals and how these means evolve over time. But it is also a film about emerging parenthood, how adults' priorities change over time and find new life meaning for themselves. But it is also about friendship, how a deep trust between two people can get them through almost anything. But it is also about fear, this time fear of the unknown and the widespread panic that it creates. Needless to say, Monsters, Inc. is about a lot of stuff. It's not one of those laser-focused affairs that you could distill down to being about just one thing. But unlike something like Brave, which is a little disorganized and confused about its central theme, Monsters, Inc. weaves all these elements together seamlessly. The energy plot shapes the self-priorities plot, which shapes the friendship plot. Its ability to equally support so many interlocking themes is the reason why Monsters, Inc. is Pixar's most well-rounded film. It's also one of Pixar's most low-key films. Not low-key in terms of excitement or action, but in terms of how relaxed they are about hammering home those central themes. It's kind of like the opposite of something like Monsters University. That was a fairly introspective character story that discussed its issues in a very upfront manner. Monsters, Inc., by contrast, isn't interested in doing something like the lake scene. Both Sully and Mike have issues that they're working on throughout the story, but there's not a lot of introspection and angst about it. Like, let's look at Sully as a character. At the beginning, he's portrayed like the star quarterback of his company, the guy his coworkers admire, his boss depends on, and his rivals are jealous of. He is at the top of his game, the top scarer at Monsters Incorporated. However, Sully finishes the film not caring about the scare record anymore, in more of a managerial sort of position, and is more preoccupied by his memory of Boo. This is a stark contrast from where he started. Sully's priorities shift dramatically throughout the adventure, and, to his credit, he just goes with the flow. There isn't much angst, no constant questioning of whether he's doing the right thing. Sully is a character with deep conviction. He knows what he is compelled to do. Early on, Mike is making plans to go on a date with Celia and asks Sully what he's doing tonight. Sully states he's just staying home and working out, to which Mike teases him. However, it's not really portrayed negatively. There isn't necessarily a judgment statement being made. An alternate version of Sully would show him at home feeling lonely, questioning if his singular goal of being the best scarer is really bringing him life fulfillment. But Monsters, Inc. plays this relatively low-key. It portrays Sully as being a task-oriented monster, more of a homebody who wants to be at his best. And Sully likes his work. He doesn't feel like there's something missing in his life. Now, Sully's evolving relationship with Boo is obviously the emotional core of the film. It drives everything that happens in Acts 2 and 3. And I gotta say, it's basically portrayed perfectly. One of the best character relationship progressions Pixar has ever done. It's just portrayed so clean, so perfect. They're especially clever in where they place Sully's outs for this situation, his 2 chances to get rid of Boo. Mike presents the first one, but it is right after he and Boo have started bonding and feeling a connection. He's not going to let go unless she's going to make it home. Later on, Randall provides the second out. However, that occurs right after Sully's big scare with the trash compactor. Sully has experienced the terror of potentially losing Boo, and is now more cautious. He is unwilling to let go unless he feels 100% comfortable. They don't skip any steps in their relationship progression. Pixar is careful to make Sully's character evolution feel earned. The trash compactor scene serves as a nice tipping point to lock in Sully's new characterization. It's also nice foreshadowing to the third Monsters, Inc. film, the one in which all the monsters subsequently ruin the planet and then run off to space. Wait, I'm confused. Anyway, Sully's new role as a parental figure is not exactly subtext. The scene with the nursery lady makes this transformation clear. I like how both he and Mike are portrayed as these confused uncle types. People have no idea how to deal with kids in general, and are just desperately trying to be as unawkward as possible. Sully even calls his buddy Uncle Mike throughout the film. But what's smart about it is that there's a clear contrast between Sully and Mike, in terms of how they look at Boo. Mike never had the experiences with her that Sully does. Mike never bothered to tuck her in at night, didn't experience the worry of potentially losing her. He's totally ready to just get rid of the kid. Mike's lack of understanding of Sully's attachment becomes the main point of contention between the two characters. Mike does not get a particularly deep dive as a character in this one, mostly just being presented as the comic relief foil. We really have to read between the lines to determine what makes Mike so different from Sully, why he doesn't care about Boo to the same degree as his friend. What is it that causes the two of them to intrinsically react so differently to her? I think the difference is that Mike is a very achievement-oriented monster, whereas Sully is more of a self-improvement-oriented monster. Mike wants to drive his fancy car, Sully would rather walk. Mike gets excited about stuff like taking his girlfriend to a nice restaurant, being the prep guy for the top scare team, and achieving the scare record. These kind of things give Mike a sense of prestige. Look how excited and oblivious he is about his commercial. But Mike is not the character going into those bedrooms to deliver the scare. His dreams of that were dashed in Monsters University. Mike has less agency than Sully in this regard. He is dependent on him being the best he could possibly be. And Mike is the one constantly overlooked. He has to fight for every scrap of recognition that he gets. I think someone like that would become more desperate to hang on to what he's built. Someone who's worked hard to get where he is and doesn't want some kid messing that up. No offense to Mike, but Boo is probably the most important character in the film, though, in terms of her portrayal. The plot mostly revolves around her, so it's paramount that the audience cares about getting her home. She is also our human link to the film, someone we, the audience, can sympathize with on a human level. Although, to be fair, Monsters, Inc. has a very multidimensional point of view, which is probably one of the coolest aspects of the film. While Boo is the human character, we're also supposed to identify deeply with the world of the monsters, as well as characters like Mike and Sully. The monsters have the same sort of problems we do, the same kind of personal insecurities, and they devolve into the same kind of widespread panic. Monsters, Inc. addresses the concept of fear in a very compelling manner, suggesting that ignorance and social pressure is often the cause. People get afraid of what they simply don't understand, and end up following what they're told. No one actually questions anything. Whereas Boo, who is very young, can subvert this dynamic and boldly step up to almost every monster she meets. Monsters, Inc. is especially clever in its construction by making Randall her monster instead of Sully. She has never been frightened by Sully. When she meets him, she sees him as a giant blue kitty. It gives her character the flexibility to still be frightened by a character like Randall, but still be the wide-eyed optimist who wants to explore the world. A heavier and less subversive version of this film would have the human character way more freaked out by the situation in general. They don't really get too deep into the ethics of scaring in this film. We're not necessarily supposed to view this behavior as insidious or creepy or parasitic, partially because we remember our own personal monster under the bed as not being a big deal, but also because Pixar uses a light touch in demonstrating this dynamic. They deliberately open the film with a fake-out, a seemingly real scare that is revealed to be a simulation. All of the scarers we get to meet and see how goofy they are before they go to work. In fact, they don't really show us a real human being scared at all, just the tank filling up. They usually give us the scary discretion shot. For this reason, it's interesting how the emotional low point of the film goes down, right before the betrayal. Boo finally sees Sully in action and is genuinely terrified by him. Sully, for the first time, takes a look in the mirror and understands the emotional response to his job. Earlier in the film, he is able to compartmentalize this, stating, "Don't worry, he's off duty." The film has never questioned whether the status quo is actually ethical, so it's interesting they bring it in right here. The character turn is really clever though, not just for the relationship drama that it creates, but also how it links to the climax. Boo has seen behind the curtain now. She is terrified of Sully, yes, but she has seen now how monsters turn on and off the switch. So I totally buy her character development at the end of the film, when she attacks Randall. Not just because she's protecting her friend, that's obviously a big factor, but because she is now able to see through Randall as well. No pun intended. Randall makes for a fun villain, thanks to Steve Buscemi's wonderful vocal performance. However, I do find him a little too incompetent as a bad guy sometimes. Mostly I get annoyed at how terrible he is at spotting Mike and Sully. Pixar goes to this well 3 different times, and Randall swings and misses on each. You're out, buddy. I do like him as a general antagonist, however. The film is especially successful in making him the distraction right out the gate, portraying him immediately as the shady guy to watch. Monsters, Inc. is a low-key film, but definitely not when it comes to Randall. They don't even risk him being viewed sympathetically. Sully wishes him good luck and wants to shake his hand. Randall refuses. That's it, you're dead to me. Randall's portrayal as a complete irredeemable jerk keeps the audience focused on him and away from what is really happening. The water noose reveal definitely makes sense as a general twist, but it's not necessarily a great mystery or anything. They carefully set up the energy crisis angle, and the quote is not being made. They even have the guy admit that he would do anything to solve the crisis. So, motive established. But that's basically where they stop. They don't necessarily drop a clue to demonstrate he's actually doing anything. To be fair, not every twist has to be a fully developed mystery. Randall's activities don't make a ton of sense if he were doing it independently, with him having a secret workspace set up and all. This kind of operation usually requires some kind of administrative support to hide. Pixar makes a lot of smart decisions in how it portrays Randall and Waternoose's scheme. Because when you think about it, the concept behind their machine is really, really, really dark. We're basically talking about child torture here. I can't think of many other Pixar villains who would go to these lengths. Actually showing this machine doing its work is probably too much for the lighthearted tone of this film. It would probably create a lot of nightmares. You notice that Pixar teases it with both Mike and Boo, but doesn't actually go through with it. The only character who actually gets it is Randall's assistant, Fungus, a character we don't really care about. And even his is relatively brief and mostly off-screen. Again, very careful stage direction on Pixar's part about what is shown and what gets the discretion shot. I gotta admit, the film loses me a little when Mike and Sully get exiled into the Himalayas. The abominable snowman is a fun character to meet, getting a lot of good lines and interactions. The Himalayas are home to a lot of nice visual compositions, a lot of natural blues and whites to contrast the synthetic 1950s aesthetic otherwise. It's also refreshing to slow down a bit and examine where we are. The problem is that this moment doesn't re-examine their relationship in a new or meaningful way. This is supposed to be their big moment of conflict, that moment where they go their separate ways. Mike is supposed to walk away from this scene with something to reconsider. He does a decent job at describing what he's lost and questioning whether he or their work matters anymore, but Sully doesn't really have a new answer for him, other than, hey, I'm saving her, this is what I'm doing. The question of why never really comes up. Compare this moment to Dory's speech at the end of Finding Nemo. That scene is so compelling because it gets to the why of Dory, what specifically she sees in Marlin. I don't know if we need the same thing for Mike, describing why the scare record means so much to him. But if you're not going to do that, I feel you need Sully to justify to Mike what he sees in Boo, and why he feels compelled to act this way. It's clear to us what Sully sees, we totally understand, but he needs to communicate this to Mike. His simple act of leaving is what makes Mike reconsider things. I get it. I get why Mike reacts this way in the end. It's just the execution comes off a little shallow. It feels like Sully has more trouble expressing himself than most Pixar protagonists. Not really in love with the execution of the Sully-Randall fight either, or the Mike return. I mean, it's funny and all, it's just a little too much shtick for my taste. This is the only kind of thing Pixar lets Mike do. It's kind of disappointing he doesn't get the big change of heart moment and subsequent badass return. It also leaves the door open regarding how Mike actually got there and whether it really makes any sense. There's a lot of stuff about Mike we don't really get to see in this film. I guess that's why they had to make Monsters University. The climax of this film is absolutely fantastic, seeing the characters go through that breathtaking roller coaster ride on those doors. I actually kind of forget about this part, since it's so heavily segmented from everything else. When they actually go back there, I'm always wowed by the spectacle of it. I think Monsters Inc. really needs this set piece in Act 3. The majority of the film is set in very mundane places, like hallways, or the office, or restaurants, or stuff like that. Even in the Himalayas, we mostly spend in a cave. This is another one of those sequences, however, where your suspension of disbelief radar goes off just a little. You know, the real-world ramifications of all those doors being activated at once. Wouldn't, just by sheer volume alone, some random human in our world open one of those doors by accident, and then fall to their deaths? I don't think that objection is a huge deal or breaks the scene or anything. It's just like the Toy Story thing, where you kinda wonder, why haven't anyone noticed anything? They do a nice job here with the pacing, running through just a few doors for variety, but not getting too gimmicky with it. The visual contrast of inside the door versus outside is very cool, that sudden drop-off. The whole villain stepping on the hero's foot thing is a bit cliche, however, although it is worth it to see Boo attack Randall in the end. Love how he changes colors so dramatically, and how Sully tells him, "You're out of a job," afterwards. Also, this is supposedly the same trailer from where A Bug's Life takes place. Neat. I hope the ants end up eating Randall. One of the coolest things about the ending of Monsters Inc., and probably its whole screenplay to be honest, is how it creates various payoffs via repetition of established elements. Nothing is only used once, they take something and continue to riff on it. The scare simulator, for example, is used 3 times. First, as the cold open, to establish the nature of the world. Secondly, as a character turn, to frighten Boo and make Sully look in the mirror. And finally, as a means to trap Waternoose. The connection between Waternoose, Sully, and the simulator is built up all throughout the film. It's all they seem to talk about. Therefore, it only makes sense that Sully traps Waternoose in the simulator. Same thing applies to Boo's laughter. It's initially a source of confusion, a mystery to plant in the background, and then they demonstrate it a second time to establish a pattern that Sully can notice. Then we get to the door sequence. We've seen the pattern happen twice now, so now both we, the audience, and Sully can understand it and put it into practice. And then they bring it back at the very, very end, as a new means of energy production. It's just such an efficient use of one plot element, being able to use it as a problem, a tool, and a solution. I also love how, retroactively, this ending works with what we learned in Monsters University about Mike. This is what Mike always wanted, to go into those bedrooms himself. It's really nice, given how much he struggled in the prequel, that he eventually gets to do it, even if it's not exactly how he's expecting it. I guess being funny is the true measure of a monster now. Speaking of which, Mike carries the majority of the humor in the film. No offense to John Goodman as Sully, who is definitely the heart, but it's Billy Crystal who drives the jokes. Really enjoy the fake musical he makes, and basically every interaction he has with Randall. He gets a lot of great slapstick as well. As for non-Wazowski stuff, those jokes with the giant orange fuzzy dude stand out. Love how he gets his revenge in the end. There are a lot of fun monster caricatures as well, like the yokel monsters, the squeaky-voiced teen monsters, and pretty much everything about Roz. Her reveal as number 1 does strike me as kinda pointless and arbitrary and not really set up very well. But Roz is such an entertaining character to watch, I'm totally fine with giving her more to do. I forgot to mention Celia, who is okay, I suppose, but ultimately feels a little pointless. She plays the girlfriend stereotype well enough, and it is nice that she comes around in the end, however small that contribution actually is. You could argue that, without Celia, there is no actual plot though. So maybe Randall should blame an impatient girlfriend for the whole thing blowing up on him. There is a sort of inevitability to the parting of Sully and Boo, something the audience intrinsically understands when watching them. We all know that Boo can't actually live with the monsters, it's not actually her world. If the film ended with her staying, I think everyone would rightfully throw a fit. Their goodbye scene is handled perfectly, hitting upon Boo's childlike excitement to see her room again, as well as showing how much Sully has grown as a character. Think about his earlier bedroom scene, when Sully is trying to get her to sleep. He's really hands-off and awkward around her, sitting at the opposite side of the room. Their goodbye scene underlines how close the two characters became. I really like how Sully looks back at her one final time, almost making that mental photograph of her before he leaves. I also love how they immediately have Boo try her closet door again, only to find the secret world whisked away from her. It's an extremely poignant and wistful moment, that return from being spirited away, reflecting on everyone you've met and whether you will ever see them again. In the end, Mike does rebuild Boo's door for Sully, giving him a chance to see her again. I used to question whether this scene was actually necessary, and whether it was just better to end on a more contemplative note. It would be slightly less satisfying, but it would be arguably more nuanced. But after reconsidering it, I feel like this final scene is essential. Not only for following up on Sully and Boo, but to close out the relationship arc between Mike and Sully as friends. As previously discussed, Mike doesn't really have a strong connection to Boo. He doesn't really understand Sully's actions and just wants to put that thing back where it came from. He definitely warms up to her, but even their goodbye is a little understated. I criticized the emotional low point of the film earlier, arguing that they don't really let Mike come around in a meaningful way. I feel these criticisms are somewhat resolved by this ending, however, this final gesture between two friends. Mike clearly understands how much Boo means to his friend, even if he does not share the close attachment to her. So it's heartwarming that he gets that moment where he can say, "Hey, I get it, I understand," and then make this for him. Mike may be the guy who goes into the rooms now, but it's nice that he prepares one final door for his buddy. The final shot of this film is basically perfect, that look on Sully's face. It's definitely one of the best closing shots in Pixar's history, if not the best. Perfect way to close out this film. Monsters, Inc. is definitely one of Pixar's more densely plotted films, hence the overall length of this review. There is so much little stuff that happens in it, but it is ultimately the characters that keep me coming back. Pixar was so successful in developing relatable and genuine characters with such fundamentally different approaches to life. At its very core, Monsters, Inc. says something about human nature, more specifically the nature of ambition, empathy, and change. Randall put it best at the beginning, describing the winds of change are coming. And that's totally fair for him to say. It sets up the entire film. Pixar portrayed him as a big believer in this change, and could actually be seen as an innovator in his field. But his ambition and his sense of jealousy effectively poisoned him, making him unable to draw the ethical line anymore. A character like Mike was portrayed as very resistant to change, someone whose personal ambition has made him self-absorbed. He criticized Sully for only caring about his work, but it is Mike who has to be dragged into eventually doing the right thing. What I appreciate about a character like Sully is his open-mindedness, his ability to look at a situation, ask questions, and be willing to change. It's still okay to have ambitions, it's okay that Sully wants to be number one and manage the factory afterwards, but he isn't a slave to these ambitions and is able to see the forest for the trees, even if he's not always successful at it. It's very fitting that Sully gets the final shot of this thing, because Monsters, Inc. ultimately belongs to him. It's his movie. But it's refreshing how Pixar didn't let him dominate the film and make it all about his issues. They don't write him like Arlo or Marlin or Remy or even Mike Wazowski. It's what makes this film come off so low-key, why it doesn't feel too preachy or sentimental or pretentious. It's honestly an impressive feat what Pixar managed to do with this one. They took an extremely energetic and action-driven plot and somehow made Monsters, Inc. into their most easygoing film. Maybe it's just that charming 1950s aesthetic. But in my book, our blue-furred protagonist is the real reason why. Or in other words, I blame John Goodman. Thanks for watching.